having rewarding but often difficult conversations on the streets. You do that together on a team, and you make solid lifelong friendships when you're doing hard things together. It's life-saving for the people we can reach, but it's life-changing for those of us who are involved. And through those kind of, genuine friendships and building up community, we can help grow the movement and reach more and more people and more communities with the truth about abortion.
Hi folks, and welcome to Humans of the Pro-Life Movement, an initiative of the Pro-Life Guys podcast where we feature the incredible men and women across the country and around the world who are making sacrifices of their time and energy for the alleviation of pain and suffering and for the protection of preborn children and their families. And my name is Cam. I am the host of this episode. Peter has done his share of episodes, and I'm back on hosting another one. And my guest today, I'm very fortunate to have him on again, a great friend of mine, Blaise Alleyne. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, thanks. Great to be here again.
Good stuff. For those of you who are new to the show, Blaise is awesome. For those of you who are not new to the show and have seen episodes that Blaise has been featured, he works full-time with CCBR as our Eastern Outreach Director. He's got a very cool journey to that position that we'll get into, but he has also been featured in a couple of other episodes that we've done. The flagship series that we have, Pro-Life Guys, he came on to talk about theory of change versus the theory of action in the pro-life movement. I believe that was episode 15 or 16, something like that. And then we did another episode of Blaise in an analysis of a debate that Stephanie Gray Connors did with Peter Singer at Harvard University. So a very, very smart guy, very good guy, and a pleasure to have him on the show. Blaise, let's dive into it. And the first question I love to ask, and I am particularly interested in your answer to this because I've been getting to know you better and better over the last couple of years here. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell the audience a little bit about who you are beyond Blaise Alleyne, the full-time pro-life guy. Tell me a little bit about what you're into, what makes you tick, and what you're passionate about.
All right, sure. Yeah, so I describe myself as a technologist, musician, writer, and activist. So that kind of sums up my main activities for technology. I did a computer science undergrad, and I've worked as a web developer and system administrator, and I've done a lot of writing on technology as well, kind of the intersection of technology and culture and those sorts of things. Music, I am a songwriter and a violinist and multi-instrumentalist for other songwriters in the Toronto area. So play live around the city or on the road when I have the opportunity, and in my home studio. And then activism, it's pro-life activism is the main thing that I do now, especially as I've been full-time with CCBR over the last couple of years. I am married with 3 kids in Toronto, and I am Catholic. And that's me in a nutshell.
Very cool. I'm sure that you probably could have gone longer and longer. I'm sure that you have a very difficult time often condensing your resume, as it were, into bios and whatnot. I'm sure that you've been victim of people introducing you at conferences and conventions and whatnot and going through the entire list of your accolades and whatnot. I don't say that to pump your tires.
I specifically wrote like 4 or 5 different versions of the bio on my website so I could hand people the right one to avoid that happening again.
Oh, bingo. Bingo. It makes sense. In some ways, it's shorter to describe the things that you don't do versus the things that you do. And from there, I'm super fascinated. And this is a question that I know that a lot of people have who are involved in various ways in the pro-life movement, that you are super involved in a bunch of different areas, right? Like you mentioned, you can find Blaise Alleyne on Spotify with your music. You can find courses that you've run through different church programs that are not necessarily abortion related. You've done tons of stuff. And I'm curious, how does this all weave together with the different crowds that you run in, the music crowds, the technology crowds, the pro-life crowds? Is this something that comes up often? And when it does come up, how do you navigate a music friend or a technology friend who's like, oh, I saw you on the news. I saw you doing pro-life stuff down Yonge and Dundas downtown when I drove by or something like that. How does that play out in your life? I'm curious.
Yeah, one of my good music friends said to me a couple weeks back, he said, you have a couple Venn diagrams of communities that you intersect with. I think that's a good way of putting it. So, I mean, I've been involved in the pro-life movement for about 15 years, And the first 10 years, it was as a volunteer. Volunteer with U of T Students for Life, a volunteer with Toronto Right to Life. And then over the last 5 years, it has been my job working for CCBR. So for the longest time, it wasn't the main thing that I was doing, even though I would carve out as much time as I could for pro-life activism. And now that it's the main thing that I'm doing, I feel like it's a lot more front and center. But all the way throughout, I think my focus has always been on kind of putting personal relationships first. So I don't bring up pro-life activism when I'm in, say, music circles, or I mean, frankly, even when I was, studying theology at U of T, like I would bring it up when relevant, but I kind of, or if I'm in a technology space, I'm not necessarily bringing up pro-life stuff, but I'm focusing on, having having quality relationships with the people around me, and especially in the music space, it's being friends with my friends in the music space, being friends and on good terms with the people that I'm playing with in different bands, and then my hope is, and thus far it has worked out, that when something does come up, we get to have that conversation in the context of a real, genuine friendship. I remember one songwriter I've played with for years. There's one time where somebody on Twitter had like their own YouTube channel. It was like 10 or 12 viewers or something, but like long form debates, and they wanted to get me to come in to discuss about abortion. So the guy replied to my latest tweet. My latest tweet was about a show I was playing with my friend. And he starts, like, this conversation about abortion starts, and my friend that weekend says, like, it's a bit odd that he like sent the message to us. And I said, I think he was looking for like people who were like really involved in the movement. And my friend was like, yeah, why would he send that to us? And like he kind of didn't, he had no idea why somebody would be approaching me to have an abortion debate conversation on YouTube. But then with that same friend, in probably within a year or two of that, like we ended up having like really interesting conversation about Jordan Peterson, and that led to opening up about pro-life activism and talking about conversations on campuses and all that kind of stuff. And it happened organically in the context of a friendship, and I think that that makes a big difference. I have decided myself, for the circles that I'm in and the goals that I have and the place that I feel I'm called, that I'm very open about the pro-life work that I do. I make no secret of it. I'm very, for a long time, I've been very open about my pro-life views online, writing for, I was blogging for U of T Students for Life for years, and on my own social media accounts. My strategy has been, it's not the only thing that I'm doing online. It's not the only thing that I'm known for, but I'm not hiding it. So you search my name on a web search, or you go to my website, and you will find pro-life stuff alongside a whole bunch of other things. So that's kind of the balance that that I've had.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned that of cushioning, not cushioning per se, but having that pro-life worldview as a genuine part of the rest of our lives. I know that it plays a different part in the lives of many people, whether it's a very large proportion of the stuff that they do day to day, whether it's a job or whether it's a hobby or whether it's a smaller proportion. I often think of Trent Horn's book, Persuasively Pro-Life. I think it's in the first chapter, he lays out that pro-lifers have to stop being weird. Like just don't be weird as a pro-lifer. And I feel like oftentimes we as pro-lifers bring the social awkwardness upon ourselves, and people just, not in a menacing way, they ask us at a party or at a get together or at a baseball league or whatever, like, oh, what do you do for work? And when you're like, oh, I do pro-life work, and the eyes go big, and you're waiting for them to attack you, and you're like, no, they're asking about your job. It's not like they're actually curious about learning everything about what you do. When you ask somebody what they do for work, how many follow-up questions do you get on it? Oh, you're an accountant. Oh, what kind of accountant are you? What were you doing last February? Was that you doing like pro-lifers make themselves weird by how they respond to some of these questions. And I love the way that you frame that within, this is a large part of what I do. I'm not ashamed of that, but I'm not going to force it into every conversation. And I think there's a lot to be said for being able to cultivate really good quality relationships that do, you almost lend credibility to it. I remember when the first and second choice chains I did on my campus at University of Victoria, I was that super annoying guy for my entire university career, that I was the guy that would put up his hand and ask questions during lectures with like 400 students. I'd be that guy always answering questions and asking questions and whatever. And so when people saw me at Choice Chain, they were like, but Cam, you're so normal. You're so normal. And I'm curious, Blaise, if that's something that you could speak to a little bit more about through the relationship that you're building with people, being able to, in some ways, lend credibility, I suppose, to the pro-life worldview, that this isn't something that is necessarily radical or insane or reserved for Bible-thumping rednecks in small parts of rural United States sort of thing. But this can be a very normal thing that you can lend credibility to through building relationships, I guess. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I know that other people have different balances. Like there's some people who, take a more intentional approach to bring up the issue in their circles. And there's other people who, for good reason, like if you're in another field where being involved in pro-life activism could be a liability, where you kind of, keep that on the down low. For me, I have always taken this approach about being very open, but among many other things that I do. And I do see it as a form of witness in a way, because I'm focused on these, like on the relationships, on the friendships, on being a good bandmate, on being a good musician, on, being a good web developer or whatever it is that I'm doing, and focusing on the relationships in front of me, so that when the issue comes up, it's Blaise, my friend. It's Blaise, the guy who plays violin in my band. It's someone that they know and appreciate. And, I think of lots of examples of that. Whether it was a colleague of my father's who happened upon a choice chain at the University of Toronto and came up and said hi, and I have no idea if he knew that I did pro-life activism before then, but I'd known him for many years, and he knew that I did it afterwards, and it was never awkward or anything. I can think of a bandmate who after having a few drinks at a wedding when we were saying farewell, he's like, "Hey, you voted for Doug Ford, didn't you?" Right? And I explained to him that you can only vote for the person you're riding, and I do not live in Etobicoke North or wherever Doug Ford is. But, he was like, "You voted Conservative." He tried to tease me a little bit for it. Actually, he said he wanted me to feel a little bit bad, but not too bad. And I said to him, "Don't worry, people have said far worse things to me." I don't think he realizes that I do street activism regularly, but a couple months down the road, when some crazy stuff was happening in Ontario provincial politics, he reached out to me, and he's like, "I don't think I know anyone else who voted Conservative in the last election, and like this seems crazy to me. I love you. What do you think about this?" Right? And whether it's like politics or my faith, or whether it's being anti-abortion, you have these kinds of authentic and genuine conversations that come up when it's in the context of a friendship. So I view that. I mean, it's in a way, it's like long-term witness and sort of long game witness. I can think of another music acquaintance. I've never played with him directly, but he's played in bands with people I've played in bands with, and we know each other around from the music scene. And he happened upon a choice chain back in 2014. This is before I was working in the pro-life movement. I was volunteering to lead what eventually became Toronto Against Abortion, and walked up to me at a choice chain, and I found out that not only like he was pro-life and he was Christian, and I had no idea until we had a conversation. We ended up talking about like strategy and the reality of abortion in Canada and why we're doing this sort of thing. But he was someone that that I already knew, and he knew me, even though he didn't know that I was involved in pro-life activism up until this time. So that's the balance that has made sense for me, and that's how I view that kind of I do think it's still an intentional witness, just kind of with more of a long-term perspective.
Absolutely. And I think that makes sense. And I think that makes sense even to, like you said, kind of evaluate different relationships differently, sort of thing, based on where those relationships are at, where they're going, frequency, the impact that conversation will have if you're more proactive or less proactive. And so I think there's a lot of wisdom in there. And you've mentioned on a few occasions now that your journey into working full-time for CCBR, working full-time in the movement, has been not only an elongated journey, but in some ways not necessarily the textbook journey. I think that for a long time, I was in some ways the textbook case for somebody who started working for CCBR. I witnessed a debate between then executive director Stephanie Gray Connors. I went from there to do the Florida mission trip and get my feet wet there. I did an internship after that. And then after that, I came on staff, kind of the textbook route. Your journey has been a little bit different than that. I think it's fair to say. Tell us a little bit about how that journey got started. Is this something that you've always been passionate about? Is this something that kind of grew in prevalence in your life as you got older, as you got involved at university to high school? What is this journey from not involved in the pro-life movement at all to very obviously involved in the pro-life movement look like for you, I guess?
Right. So maybe the start was kind of typical, and then I ended up taking a bit of a less typical path. So, I mean, I grew up pro-life by default. I remember first seeing abortion victim photography when I was 11 on a family vacation. Kingston, Ontario, just driving by the road. I remember seeing the photos. I remember asking my parents what they were, and I just remember the word abortion. And I had that link between the photos and abortion for when that topic came up later. In high school, I would say I became really convicted. It wasn't just pro-life by default, but I was assigned to the pro-life position in an abortion debate and had to do the research and went and talked to my mom and realized she had been through 5 difficult pregnancies and faced pressure to abort my younger brother because it was a high-risk pregnancy. And learning some of the family history and learning just what the state of the law was in Canada and the U.S. and about abortion procedures, I really became convicted. That's when I would actively defend the pro-life position when it came up through the rest of high school, such that by the time I got to the University of Toronto, so I started there in 2005, when I was on the lookout for new clubs and I heard about the pro-life club, I was interested. I was showing up. And that's where I first encountered CCBR. The founders, Stephanie and Jojo, had come to the U of T campus, University of Toronto campus on various occasions, and I did my first activism with the CCBR project the end of first year in 2006 with what's now the Abortion Awareness Project. We used to run that once a year on campus. I think I never did an internship because there weren't internships at that time, and I was so committed to so many other things that it was difficult for me to give up, a full week or a full few months for pro-life work, even though I was steadily volunteering. Remember Jojo Ruba invited me to come to Calgary for the crash course in 2010, but I was getting married that summer, so I never kind of took a further step to be involved directly with CCBR, but I stayed involved in Toronto. I was the technology officer for U of T Students for Life during my undergrad, and then in my master's, which I chipped away at part-time over 8 years, I was the education coordinator for the club. So I was involved with U of T Students for Life for 15 years with just a little gap in there. I was a true student for life, as I took forever to finish 2 degrees. But when I finished my undergrad, I wasn't planning to do a master's at the time, and I wanted to stay involved in the pro-life movement in an intentional way. And there were a couple other U of T alumni or students who had joined the board of Toronto Right to Life. So I talked to them, and I ended up joining the board myself and ended up becoming president of Toronto Right to Life for a decade as a volunteer on the board. So U of T Students for Life and Toronto Right to Life were my primary areas of involvement as a volunteer. For U of T Students for Life, I did the website and I showed up to activism, but there was a point at which there was a point at which everyone else had graduated and activism kind of fell off, and other undergrad students would refer to me and a few others as the dinosaurs because we were the grad students who had been around for several years. And I realized that I had more experience than a lot of people in the club. So inspired by CCBR's work, I started the activism team at U of T, which grew into Toronto Against Abortion. So that was like another level of volunteering around 2013, 2014, where I wasn't just showing up as a committed member of the team, but I was leading the team and trying to make sure that activism was happening in Toronto. And then similarly with Toronto Right to Life, I got involved there at the board level and helped build the team and helped change the strategy so Toronto Right to Life could get more involved in the front lines doing effective pro-life work. And it was through those volunteer efforts that I was involved in my first 10 years in the pro-life movement. And then in 2016, there was a real kind of couple months of providence where U of T Students for Life had hit a level of activism more regularly, and Toronto Right to Life got really involved, and I was volunteering at unsustainable levels, and conversation happened with CCBR about joining staff right at the time where CCBR was placing staff members more permanently in the Greater Toronto Area, not just for summer internships, but year round, and everything kind of came together within a few months, and that's the point at which I started working in the movement rather than just volunteering. So a long period of volunteering in different ways before becoming a part-time staff member for a few years, and then eventually full-time.
Very cool, very cool. And I'd love to dive into what helped you make the decision to choose CCBR specifically. Obviously, this is a CCBR show, and so this isn't just pumping our own tires, I suppose. But not only with so many opportunities with your other realms of music and technology and theology, I'm sure as well, but I'm sure that there's any number of pro-life organizations that would have loved to hire you. And I'm sure that you're still in some ways beating them off with a stick, trying to say, no, I'm happy with CCBR. Hopefully that's what you're saying to them. But what was it about CCBR that inspired you to kind of look at those other career opportunities or options and say, no, I really want to pursue this working for CCBR? What was it about CCBR that kind of made you want to commit in that direction, I guess?
Yeah. See, I don't feel super awkward talking about what I love about CCBR. I don't feel like sort of tooting my own horn because I spent more time outside than inside. And I still feel just so privileged to be part of the team with CCBR because CCBR is what inspired me to get more and more involved in the pro-life movement. And it was through CCBR that, the critical thinking about effective strategy in pro-life education, like that was all CCBR influence and inspiration for me and my motivation, So in undergrad, it was encountering Stephanie and Jojo, the co-founders of CCBR, hearing them in debates, hearing them give talks at the University of Toronto and elsewhere, participating in what's now the Abortion Awareness Project. That day in first year when I first showed up, I was nervous to talk to other people or to identify myself as a volunteer. I've been moved by the images and the videos. I think I saw The Hard Truth by Greg Cunningham from CBR when I was in first year. I was moved myself by the photos and videos, but I was nervous about showing them in public. I showed up not identifying myself as a volunteer, just planning to listen in, and I ended up skipping all my classes for the whole day and just talking to people about abortion because I saw and experienced how effective it was to have those conversations in the context of this kind of activism. I was inspired by CCBR's critical analysis of pro-life strategy, which I read in my undergrad, that just takes a look at the pastoral, political, and educational arms of the movement. And, for pro-life education, ask questions like, are we being efficient? Does the frequency match the urgency of the problem? Are we blending other moral issues? Are we actually reaching our target audience? Who is our target audience? And are the projects we're picking actually going to reach them? And all these kinds of questions, they really influenced my thinking and made a difference. And I could see on the ground with U of T Students for Life, the massive difference when we started employing what was launched as the End the Killing plan, the End the Killing strategy locally in our campus. There was a time when we got to running weekly activism. And I remember it was end of September 2015. And I was talking to someone, and it was our third choice chain of that school year. And the guy's like, I see you guys at the subway station. I see you at the street festival. I see you here. And those are the three places we've been so far. But it's we were changing the campus by making abortion impossible to ignore. And, you could tell in the individual conversations, in the coverage from campus media, in the way that people were thinking about abortion who wouldn't have been otherwise. You could see the effectiveness of putting this strategy in play. I mentioned the End the Killing plan. CCBR launched the End the Killing plan. And again, I don't feel like I'm bragging because I was not part of CCBR at the time. You were an intern for that summer. I was a volunteer being inspired in Toronto when CCBR ran a national tour being this is how we're going to systematically make abortion unthinkable across the country, because we need to reach everyone with abortion victim photography and human rights apologetics. And here's a plan to do it, and we need everyone to do their local part. And I showed up to volunteer at all the Toronto stops, and I drove out to Ottawa for the final day and Canada Day. And I had a chance to go to Florida for what's now the Abortion Awareness Project in 2013. I attended the crash course myself in 2015. Like, I still feel like a CCBR fanboy, and it's still crazy for me to think that I am responsible for CCBR outreach on this half of the country. It's like a dream job. Like, when it's a dream job because it's so effective and so impactful and such meaningful work. When I got married in 2010 and CCBR did not have staff in Ontario, it was just the Calgary office at the time. My wife and I joked about just moving to Calgary because there were teaching jobs there. She's a teacher, and it was hard to find a job in Ontario. And it's like, we'll move there. You'll get a job as a teacher. I'll just work for CCBR. And we ran into Stephanie Gray on our honeymoon at the Calgary airport. And like, I was CCBR fanboy, seeing one of my pro-life heroes, right? And I still feel like that most days of the week. I still feel so privileged to be able to have the main thing that I do be so meaningful, so impactful, and to be effective and be able to pass on the ways in which I've been inspired and I've learned how to think more critically and be more effective, and teach other pro-lifers and mentor them and inspire them and encourage them to do the same thing and to be part of growing the movement.
And I love that note that you end on there, actually, about the mentorship, because I see this in my day-to-day stuff as I observe what you're doing out east. You hold a very similar kind of role as I do out west, working for CCBR, and seeing how the humility and the passing it on, what you had received from the JoJos and Stephanies, and are now passing on to the newer CCBR staff members, that guidance, the wisdom, the anchoring of, this is what drives the movement, this regular activism, the engagement of people, the exposure of the images. I think that's so cool to see that now that you're handing it on. I also chuckle at you being a fanboy, because there's been a number of meetings that you and I have been a part of that you've been explaining a strategy or walking through your analysis of something. And I've just leaned over to the person sitting beside me as I'm listening and just saying, I'm so glad this guy's on our side. I'm so glad that this guy's part of the pro-life movement, because if he wasn't, we would be absolutely hooped. And so the feeling is very mutual of appreciation. Obviously, and that's speaking on behalf of CCBR, I'm sure. And so from that then, with your kind of unique journey and unique experience, I suppose, within the pro-life movement, being on boards of directors, speaking at some of the largest conferences that have happened in Canada, while also doing the grassroots, on the ground, delivering postcards to mailboxes and talking to people on street corners and whatnot. I'm curious about any memorable experiences that you've had that still stand out. Maybe they happened a decade ago, maybe they happened last week, but what stands out to you from your time working and volunteering in the pro-life movement?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, so many stories to share. I mentioned the new abortion caravan and traveling to Ottawa for that last day. One memorable moment was on that day. There were 4 of us. So we were choice chaining on Canada Day at Parliament Hill, just bringing attention to the fact that, yes, there's a lot to celebrate about Canada, but this is also a country where there's a whole class of human beings that has no human rights, and we kill nearly 300 children every day. So we're bringing that to people's attention on Canada Day. I'm off near the East Block with 3 others doing a small part of the choice chain there, and the RCMP come in and clear a path for vehicles to travel through. And the 4 of us end up being at the front of this crowd, holding our choice chain signs with prenatal imagery and abortion victim photography, not knowing what's going on. And then we see the Prime Minister's motorcade come through. So we had a chance to be there right at the front of the crowd. And choice chain Prime Minister Stephen Harper, who at the time was, effectively the de facto leader of the pro-choice movement, like defending the status quo in Canada and making sure that he saw the victims of abortion too. That was a sort of neat moment and neat opportunity. I mean, a lot of, like, my mind for memories goes to a lot of campus activism, because that's where most of the activism I've done has been for years at U of T, and then spreading that to campuses across Toronto and then to the broader city. But like, a lot of campus activism. And for the Toronto Against Abortion Project, we have a lot of student volunteers involved, and we do a lot of campus activism. And, a really memorable season was fall 2016. I talked about that providential moment. This is where CCBR staff were establishing an office in the Greater Toronto Area more permanently, where I just joined staff, where Toronto Right to Life decided to jump into the End the Killing Plan and launch the Toronto Against Abortion Project. And U of T Students for Life, the activism team that was now becoming this bigger thing, was reaching this kind of momentum, where we had enough U of T students and support from other staff members. From a U of T perspective, we called it, like, we kind of conduct a foreign invasion of Ryerson University. You know, we had a whole bunch of U of T students who can come out and help a Ryerson student who had just done an internship with CCBR and wanted to make abortion unthinkable at her university too. And that was so memorable because Ryerson is, you know, has a student union who for 20 years had shut out the pro-life clubs no matter what they were doing, you know, had been hostile to the pro-life message. And we just, you know, this perfect storm, this perfect combination of factors to make it possible to do activism there regularly. And we just realized we don't need their permission to show up on the public sidewalks and show the truth about abortion to students at Ryerson. And we turned the campus on its head and made abortion impossible to ignore, and got people thinking about abortion while dealing with counter protesters and, you know, just lots of crazy stories from activism and wild stuff to deal with. But it was such a memorable moment, that first quote unquote invasion of Ryerson. That is, like, when we came together and started regularly bringing the truth about abortion to Ryerson, because, you know, we faced so many challenges and so many obstacles, yet had such great success reaching people. And it really brings you together as friends and as a team when, you know, you're doing hard things together. And that was probably a kind of highlight of campus activism. But, you know, I could tell you stories from the last week at U of T Scarborough, at Ryerson as well. Like, it's just, it's such a great place to have conversations because people are open to dialogue. They really need the pro-life message at that stage in life. Maybe they're sort of forming their views that could stay with them for the rest of their adult life. You know, you have the chance to influence leaders of tomorrow, like future politicians, doctors, lawyers, you know, just lots of great moments doing campus activism in the Toronto area would be highlights, I think.
Love it. And I love the way, even in some ways, how you connect the two of those together. Because as you mentioned, I was a part of that No Abortion Caravan. That's actually how I met you. I slept in your spare room at our Toronto stop. And I remember, I think back to that summer. And that summer, I think that we did 50 choice chains or something in 22 communities across Canada. And this was incredible. This was like unheard of, this volume of activism happening, 22 choice chains. And that was our flagship project at the time. And now we look at it, and here we are almost 10 years later, and we're getting that done in a couple of weeks now, plus all of the postcarding, plus all of the door knocking, plus all of our other projects and whatnot. And I think that we've seen groups like Toronto Against Abortion through Toronto Right to Life and other groups across the country really take hold of the End the Killing strategy that CCBR has of changing hearts and minds on the issue of abortion. As you can see on the t-shirt, change minds, save lives, transform culture. Taking that end game and applying it everywhere that we can. And you've been instrumental, Blaise, in mobilizing people, especially in Eastern Canada, obviously, not only through the internships that you have a hand in, but also with the Against Abortion groups and other pro-life groups that are doing CCBR's activism. Even in the last couple months here, you've helped start up a new group in Montreal. And I'm curious, as we start to wind up this Humans of the Pro-Life Movement interview, I know it's a little bit longer than they often are. Maybe talk a little bit about what kind of mentality at a high level, and then what kind of, whether it's, I don't know, phrasings or whatever, to get people motivated and involved. How have you mobilized, and what do you go into a meeting with pro-lifers with an effort to mobilize them in effective pro-life outreach? What does that look like for you? And what words of wisdom might you have, even for somebody who might be listening and watching this video, who is thinking about getting more actively involved and just needs a little nudge to tip them over the edge? What does that mobilization look like for you? And what words of wisdom would you have for somebody thinking about that, I guess?
Yeah, well, the growth and the momentum through the End the Killing Plan has been a huge inspiration to me as well, because when I was in first year and we were that first day of activism that I talked about, I skipped all my classes after being nervous about it. We had our friends from the closest campus club come, and that was in Hamilton. So an hour drive away was the closest, other group. And now almost every day in Toronto, we've got people from, there's like 9 or 10 different campuses that have active pro-lifers around. Like, there's just been so much growth, and, from just a couple community groups to having a dozen spread throughout southwestern Ontario, and then, in Ottawa and now in Montreal. It's been really inspiring to see and a privilege to be a part of that growth. I think that one thing, maybe a theme here is the friendship. We talked about friendship in terms of, interacting with other people and the other kind of circles I'm involved with. I think that's key in my approach to mentorship and team building as well. I've had some really good conversations with some of my friends who I've mentored, about how we are it's in the context of friendship that I would pass along the things that I've learned and, support them in building up a team or growing and developing as pro-life leaders. I've always tried to do this, whether it's intentionally or just what I naturally feel more comfortable doing. But I don't like the idea of talking down to people. I much like the way I think about mentorship and helping people develop is, coming alongside them and journeying with them, being along with someone for part of the journey. It's been super inspiring to see that happen with some people, some of my good friends. So I was just at a wedding last weekend with 2 of my good friends who, were past presidents of Ryerson and U of T pro-life clubs, right? And it was through activism that we became, that level of good friends. Or I think about my friend Michelle, who's now the executive director of Toronto Right to Life. And I remember when she was a first-year student coming to her first meeting at U of T Students for Life, and eventually becoming club president, and now executive director of Toronto Right to Life, a key partner of CCBR in the GTA. And I feel like a proud dad sometimes, but also I'm working alongside my best friend, I'm working alongside a close friend. And I think that's really key. And if you broaden that from the individual to the kind of group level, one thing I think that helped activism explode in Toronto around 5 years back, when I mentioned the U of T and Ryerson collaboration and stuff like that, was working together across the city. And, the team grew when we were spending more time together as a team. We were doing activism, but we were also spending time together to learn, doing seminars and time together for socials. And, rather than being in our own separate pro-life club bubbles here and there, just all being part of the same team, working on the same thing. And it just it allowed everything to grow, because, maybe in one area of the city, there was a couple really dedicated and experienced pro-lifers, but not enough people to get activism done. And we could travel over there and make activism happen. In another area of the city, there were 20 or 30 pro-lifers who were enthusiastic but brand new and needed a lot of training. So a couple of veterans could come in and help them. And, it kind of grows the whole movement when you work together collaboratively like that. And it's been a privilege to be a part of that with Ontario community groups as well, in southwestern Ontario, encouraging more collaboration in the same way that happened across the GTA, to see that happen across different cities throughout Ontario. And you mentioned Montreal against abortion. I've been to Montreal 4 times now to work with them. And earlier today, I was just planning my 5th trip for a few weeks from now. And they've come to Toronto a couple times to do a choice chain with us the first time almost a year ago, and to come for the Toronto crash course. And it was a Toronto high school teacher who had come to the crash course here, who made the connections in Montreal, inspired them, trained them. He came out to Montreal as well. I mentioned Michelle from Toronto Right to Life. She traveled with me the last time we went to Montreal. We're going back and forth between Montreal and Toronto. We're building a sense of community to build the movement. So as friends and as a broader movement that is collaborating together, that's how we encourage that growth to happen. That's how we see activism happen in new cities. That's how we see more and more people get involved. So I don't know, I'm really passionate about that, because it's a big inspiring and motivating factor for me. I'm thrilled to see it happen. I feel blessed to have a role to play in that. And yeah, like I mean, I would just encourage people, when you're doing hard things, like talking to people about the truth about abortion, and having rewarding but often difficult conversations on the streets. You do that together on a team, and you make solid lifelong friendships when you're doing hard things together. And it's it's life saving for the people we can reach, but it's life changing for those of us who are involved. And through those kind of genuine friendships and building up community, we can help grow the movement and reach more and more people and more communities with the truth about abortion. That motivates me. I hope that's a motivation to anyone who's listening as well.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense, because there's so many different factors that are going to influence people's involvement, how they get involved, where they get involved, who they get involved with. And I love what you said about, again, that relationship component, how that mentorship, like you said, is kind of that coming alongside, befriending and mentoring on a not quite a peer-to-peer level, but on that kind of level of, this is what I've learned. This is how I think that it can help in your area. Let's go back and forth with ideas, that kind of thing. I think that's so good. And I love what you mentioned at the end about the shared experience of the hardship at times of pro-life work. I often chuckle about how you don't become active in the pro-life movement to make friends necessarily, certainly not in volume, but in quality, certainly. Many of my best friends that I have now are friends from the movement, and it's because of that shared experience, because of the crazy wild rides we've gone through, and the ups and the downs, and the great joys that we've seen, and people changing their mind on abortion, and the tough days of just being showered with all sorts of vitriol and whatnot coming down on us. And so I think there's a ton to be said for that. And for you who are listening, if you're in Southwest Ontario, Blaise is speaking at a ton of content, or ton of conferences and whatnot around then. I'm sure at least some of them are virtual right now, but take the opportunity. If you find somebody in the pro-life movement that inspires you, if you find somebody who you're really interested in, don't feel like you need to be a fanboy, quite like Blaise was, and like circling around to try to catch Stephanie Gray Connor's eye. Just walk straight up to Blaise, because he's an awesome guy to chat with. I don't know if he'll let you buy him a beer, but buy him whatever his drink of choice, and go from there. Blaise, this has been an absolute blast. Thanks so much for joining for today's episode.
Thanks so much for having me back again.
My pleasure. And for those of you who are tuning in, again, this is Humans of the Pro-Life Movement, where we are trying to highlight the incredible men and women from across the country and around the world who are involved in the pro-life movement in various capacities. This is one of the episodes. Check on our other episodes to see the other cool people who are working in various ways to try to end abortion in Canada and around the world. Check on our other content as well, whether that's our flagship, our Pro-Life Guys podcast that you can find on any of your favorite podcast catchers or YouTube, or on our website, prolifeguys.com. You can buy sweet merch like this, a t-shirt or others like it, water bottles, whatever you want. If you want to become a partner of the show, please do check out patreon.com/prolifeguys to find out how you can partner with us to increase our reach through the podcast. And at the end of the day, please get involved. That's one of the cool things about our Patreon levels as well, that it's not your standard Patreon alone. It's not just financial partnership. If you get actively involved in a local pro-life group that is doing something somewhat CCBR related, and some kind of leader can corroborate that, you can achieve the different Patreon levels through your volunteer hours, not just through your financial partnership, but also through the sacrifice of your time and energy as well. So that's really cool. You can learn more about that. Patreon.com/prolifeguys. Thank you for tuning in. I hope that you will tune in again for future episodes. God bless y'all.